Kia ora, and welcome to my presentation on women's agency in Dune. I will be examining answers to the question, to what extent do the women of Dune have agency? I'll be doing this by first looking at definitions of agency, then looking at the all-female Bene Gesserit organization, and then looking at some characters in Dune. There are several ways of defining agency. I'm using a humanist approach to agency, which defines it as a human capacity for self-determination and control over one's body and life, and the ability to actively influence event outcomes. But it also acknowledges that these are still mediated by the particular context of a situation. This definition sits in opposition to a more postmodern approach to agency, which recognizes that human choices and decision-making do exist, but that factors such as socialization and conditioning are actually responsible for a lot of what seems like a person's independent actions, and it's hard to determine how much control a person has once all of the different variables in their environment are factored in. Science fiction has had a complicated relationship with women in agency for decades, and debates about their presence, characterization, and representation continue in both academic and popular circles. The genre has been criticized for its exclusion and stereotypical portrayals of women that don't take advantage of the limitless potential for imagining new worlds and new ways of being. Although most of the credit has gone to 1970s science fiction for breaking the norms, Dune has been overlooked for the amount and types of agency it provides for women, likely because it is more subtle than other texts or because it has a male author. Before looking at Dune, I want to mention some examples of characters that many would agree have relatively higher levels of agency that you may be familiar with from American science fiction film and television. One of the pioneering women on screen was Ellen Ripley from the Alien series, as well as Sarah Connor from the Terminator series. On television, there was Dana Scully, MD, from The X-Files. The last decade has had Furiosa from Mad Max Fury Road and Dolores from Westworld. There is still an overrepresentation of white women, but there have been some examples of women of color with agency, though change has been slow. Uhura played a groundbreaking role in the Star Trek series in the 1960s, as did Zoe Elaine Washburn from Firefly. Westworld has prominently featured women of color, such as Charlotte Hale and Maeve Millay, and the whole series itself is concerned with questions of agency and whether a person's choices are pre-programmed or freely made. Although the degree of agency each of these women has is subject to debate, overall they are shown to be skillful, self-determining, and actively influential characters, rather than passively accepting their circumstances or waiting to be rescued. The term strong women is sometimes used for these kinds of characters, but it is useful to look at the level of influence and control they have over themselves and their environment. This relates to another issue, which is the tension between femininity and masculinity in the roles characters have. If masculinity is equated with strength, and so a strong character is presumed to have masculine characteristics, this means that if a female character is merely substituted in for a male one, this doesn't leave open the possibility to see characters exerting agency in other avenues, particularly ones that have been regarded as inferior for being feminine. For example, there is a tendency to feature women wielding weaponry as a sign of their active role in the narrative. If they're out shooting the enemy, they must be strong and courageous. Scully offers a notable exception to this, but she is still an FBI agent with a gun. What about all of the other ways in which a character could demonstrate their agency besides physical strength or violence? Even in well-intentioned efforts to give women non-traditional roles, the result may be a very narrow imagining of what an agential woman looks like and how she behaves. Looking at agency, then, is a way of looking beyond whether someone appears strong in relation to stereotypically masculine or feminine behaviors or roles, and this is particularly relevant in the case of Dune. Looking at agency in Dune, it's important to put it into context and consider the setting, because that will inform any discussion about agency in the novel. I've included 4 aspects here that are related to the feudal, medieval-type setting of Dune. One is that authority and hierarchy are a crucial part of this world. There is a rigid class structure layered with an emperor at the top, major and minor houses with their ruling dukes and barons, and so forth. There is also a significant amount of training and education that goes along with certain places in the hierarchy to prepare each person for their role in society, and this will affect their decision-making. Other factors are religion and prophecy, with certain characters spreading religious propaganda that other characters follow along with, which affects how they behave regardless of their beliefs. Finally, there is the overall element of world building, or how the author creates the fictional world for the reader to experience. To succeed at world building, an author needs to develop a world with elements that fit together plausibly and make the world believable so the reader can immerse themselves into the fictional universe. If the setting is feudal and medieval, like in Dune, there will be certain elements that readers expect and others that wouldn't make very much sense, and this will affect plot elements, characterization, etc. This wouldn't be a universe where everyone is equal, nor would it be expected that all men or all women would be empowered. Therefore, this setting does not necessarily prevent women and men from exerting agency, but it does dictate to some extent the areas in which they would be more likely to do so. I've listed 7 areas of agency in broad categories that are relevant to this discussion of Dune: political, religion, domestic, the body, military, education, and history. I will use this chart as a visualization of these areas in which characters exert agency. The Bene Gesserit are an all-female organization or faction that is one of the most influential in the Dune universe, and they have a variety of ways of expressing their agency. Here are aspects of their bodily agency. At the center is their training in prana and bindu, which gives them the ability to control every nerve and muscle of the body. From this stems other types of control, including reproductive control, which lets them choose when to conceive and which sex to have. They have fighting skills and can engage in hand-to-hand combat without needing weapons. In fact, they are considered more skillful than the Emperor's legendary Sardaukar troops. If they undergo the spice agony and ingest a poisonous drug to expand their consciousness, they gain access to other memory, which gives them psychic access to their female ancestors. This provides them with additional information, wisdom, and resources with which to make decisions. The Bene Gesserit also have precise perceptive abilities. They can pick out minute details that most people would miss, and this allows them to better understand their environment, other people, and themselves. They can also use what is known as the voice, where they pitch their voice to a certain register in order to control someone else, either compelling them to physically move or persuading them of an idea, with encouragement beyond ordinary persuasion. They also can perform truth-saying, which means they can tell whether someone believes they're telling the truth or not. Essentially, they are like a human lie detector. What's important to note about these abilities is that they are designed to be realistic rather than magical. They are based on Herbert's years of research on subjects such as biofeedback, meditation, and yoga practices, and social sciences like linguistics and psychology, although some of the psychoanalytical aspects of the collective unconscious and other memory may seem like a stretch. Herbert was melding concepts from non-Western cultures, like the mind-body connection, in his characterization of the Bene Gesserit's arsenal of abilities. So even though some characters try to label them as witches, this is because they are afraid of what they cannot explain, afraid of powerful women, not because there is magic at work. What the Bene Gesserit do with all of these extraordinary abilities is pursue their goal, which is kept mysterious, but essentially boils down to wanting to direct human affairs through politics. They take on a variety of roles to do so, including as advisors, truth-sayers, missionaries, leaders, concubines and spouses, mothers, historians, and fighters. Tasks they do include testing for humans so that they can prevent another enslavement by thinking machines or computers, spreading religious propaganda via what they call the Missionaria Protectiva to secure bolt holes through the universe, making alliances with ruling families and organizations, just as has been done throughout history, and operating a woman-controlled breeding program to both produce more Bene Gesserit women and produce a male Bene Gesserit called the Kwisatz Haderach, or someone who can bridge space and time with mental powers. Presumably, they desired this as someone they could wield power through at arm's length, an idea related to the theory that power corrupts absolutely, which Herbert hinted at in one of his interviews about the novel. Any discussion of women in Dune starts with Jessica, a member of the Bene Gesserit who is the most well-developed and prominent female character and has agency in several areas. As the concubine and secretary of Duke Leto, her work and advice have significant political influence on him, as was often the case in medieval courts, and continues to hold true for the significant others of political leaders. Later, this role extends to her advising Paul and the Fremen in important matters. In the area of religion, she uses her knowledge of other languages and the myths and legends of the Missionaria Protectiva to solidify her and Paul's position among the Fremen. She also undergoes the dangerous Water of Life ceremony and becomes a Reverend Mother among the Fremen. In domestic matters, she manages the Atreides household and monitors staff and visitors with her precise perceptive abilities to keep them safe. In terms of education, She takes responsibility for raising Paul and training him as a Bene Gesserit in defiance of the organization's rules, which virtually ensures that Paul will be able to become the extraordinary Kwisatz Haderach. The reader only sees her fight once, when she bests Stilgar while she is unarmed, but this suggests she is highly skilled in combat, and Stilgar wants her to teach the Fremen her way of battle. As a Bene Gesserit, she possesses the bodily abilities already discussed, and so she is able to choose the sex of her children and use the voice when it suits her purposes. However, she also faces some noticeable constraints on her activity. There is a brief mention of her being sold to Leto by the Bene Gesserit school when she was young, which suggests that she did not have a choice in this situation. Although this may fit with concubinage practices and be a way for Herbert to comment on the ability for women to surpass societal expectations, as indicated by Jessica's conversation that closes the novel, this still points to a lack of agency before the events of the novel. The reader also hears about her being torn between her duty to the Bene Gesserit and her personal desires, and sees her conflicted about her loyalties as a member of the Bene Gesserit and the Atreides family. In addition, there is the situation when she is faced with a decision to endanger her fetus in order to secure her and Paul's safety among the Fremen. On the whole, though, Jessica is characterized as a highly agential woman with plausible limitations and societal pressures she must navigate around, making her a realistic, three-dimensional character who transcends stereotypical depictions of women in science fiction. Another key Bene Gesserit is Reverend Mother Gaius Helen Mohiam, although she only appears at the beginning and end of the novel. She helped educate Jessica and comes to administer the Gom Jabbar test of humanness to Paul, and she shows how the voice works by using it on him. She provides him and Jessica with advice on their upcoming move to Arrakis, including telling Jessica to train Paul in the voice for his own safety, and it appears she doesn't get Jessica in trouble for breaking the rules by training Paul as a Bene Gesserit. As a truthsayer, she influences others' behaviors because they act differently if they know they may have to answer to her and won't be able to lie. This is significant in the narrative because it means Jessica and Paul have a chance to escape from their captors rather than being killed outright. Later, the reader sees Mohiam in her role as the Emperor's truthsayer and advisor, providing advice to him in the crucial conflict with Paul and the Fremen. Mohiam is constrained in some ways. She's not always listened to by the Emperor, and she's also torn between her affection for Jessica and her duty to the Bene Gesserit. The image of her standing over the seated Emperor, with her hands on his throne, makes it clear that she is a force to be reckoned with, and possesses significant agency in her position. Princess Irulan is an interesting woman to study because she is not a major character inside the storyline, but nonetheless plays an important role in the novel. The chapters in Dune are not numbered, but instead feature an italicized epigraph above each of them, and these are excerpts from texts that list the Princess Irulan as the author. Texts include Manual of Muad'Dib, Analysis, the Arrakeen Crisis, Conversations with Muad'Dib, and The Wisdom of Muad'Dib. The epigraphs include the foreshadowing of events, personal reflections, and philosophical musings, and through them, Irulan shapes the reader's understanding of the chapter that follows. The emphasis on Muad'Dib rather than Paul also shows that she is controlling the history, and thus the legacy of Paul as a prophet and savior figure, giving her an influential role in the myth-making process. When she does appear as a character in the storyline, she facilitates a smooth transition of power against her father's protest by agreeing to marry Paul, even though Paul has just decimated the Emperor's forces. But this decision constrains her in that she was bound by duty to marry the next Emperor anyway, and she appears to be headed for a loveless political marriage, in which being a historian is one of her sole comforts. Irulan's agency is thus a complex matter, but the constant voice of a Bene Gesserit woman at the beginning of each chapter does provide her with a significant degree of agency in terms of the reader's experience, and it also reinforces the idea that the Bene Gesserit are influential characters. Finally, there's Chani, who is not as well developed as Jessica, but shows that non-Bene Gesserit women also have agency, though not to the same degree. Chani is a girl who is traveling with Stilgar's military troop when they find Jessica and Paul, and Stilgar asks her to take care of Paul and teach him the Fremen's ways. Later, she takes on the role of Sayadina, a leader in the Fremen's religion, and she and Paul enter into a consensual relationship. She kills challengers to Paul's leadership and oversees his coming-of-age ceremony when he must call and ride a sandworm. At the close of the novel, she is poised to negotiate with Jessica in the Emperor's surrender. In other ways, Chani is constrained, as when she goes to the south to stay with the other women and children, away from the raids, and the reader doesn't see her participating in society. She also faces the fact that Paul is going to enter a political marriage with Irulan, which resigns Chani to the role of concubine, although Jessica provides reassurance that this should not concern her. There is not enough narrative space given to Chani to make her as agential as the Bene Gesserit, and she lacks their wide range of abilities, but she still exerts agency in several areas of the novel. Here is a brief comparison with some of the male characters to demonstrate that their agency is multifaceted, and they face limitations as well. Leto Atreides is the Duke of a major house and has great responsibility as a political and military leader in the Imperium, as well as significant political influence. But he is heavily pressured to move to Arrakis into a trap set by the Harkonnen and the Emperor, and he is also unaware of the Bene Gesserit's breeding program or Jessica's plans for Paul, meaning he cannot act on this knowledge. Leto's Mentat Master of Assassins, Thufir Hawat, is a trusted and loyal advisor who makes decisions under Leto's command. But he is ignorant of his own faults and reliance on data as a Mentat, and he is exploited by the Harkonnens, captured by them, and only at the close of the novel realizes he was wrong all along about the traitor. Leto's son Paul is also an influential political and military leader, and is even more highly trained and skilled than other characters, since he receives training as the Duke's son, a Mentat, and a Bene Gesserit, and later as a Fremen. He is the long-awaited Kwisatz Haderach who has prescient abilities, and he steps into the role of the Lisan al-Gaib and Muad'Dib in line with the Bene Gesserit's legend spread on Arrakis. However, although he is held up as the hero of the novel, he's actually quite trapped by the myths and prescient visions through which he lives his life, and the reader sees him begin to lose his humanity and capacity for emotions. He does lead the Fremen to victory and oust their enemies, but he admits that he is powerless to prevent the jihad. There's also the point where he falls into a long coma and would have been buried alive if not for the intervention of Jessica and Chani, who revives him. In many ways, Paul's future has been predetermined by the Bene Gesserit's political activities that preceded him, leaving him constrained to a path with few choices. In this presentation, I've argued that the women of Dune have agency to a great extent and in a variety of areas, including political, religion, domestic, military, education, history, and the body. The context and setting play a role in what agency looks like, and there are constraints present at various points, but overall, Dune offers a representation of women who are active and influential. There are many more aspects of this topic that could not be covered here, so I encourage you to find further analysis on my website at dunescholar.com. Thank you.